later on. Okay, it's recording. Great. So we'll begin. So hello, my name is Sam Hirsch, and I'm a board member of Horizon Ottawa. First, I want to acknowledge that I am on the unceded and unsurrendered land of the Algonquin territory. I know that others tonight are situated on other lands, so I also want to acknowledge that some here tonight are on unceded Mohawk lands, as well as the unceded and unsurrendered land of the Erie, Neutral, Huron-Wendat, Haudenosaunee, and Mississauga nations, as well as the unceded land of the Coast Salish peoples. And I think this is incredibly important to acknowledge and recognize as settlers on whatever land you're on tonight, especially when talking about municipal politics, as planning, use, and development of land, which was forcibly taken from Indigenous communities through war, colonization, and manipulation, is one of the principal discussions and debates that take place at this level of government, and Indigenous communities are often excluded from these conversations, as we will talk about later this evening. Comme j'ai dit juste avant, je m'appelle Sam Hirsch et je suis un membre du conseil d'administration d'Horizon Ottawa. Pour ceux et celles ce soir qui ne connaissent pas notre organisation, nous sommes une organisation créée l'été dernier qui se lutte pour une ville où tout le monde peut s'épanouir. Et pour une ville et un conseil municipal qui n'ait pas peur d'être une championne des causes progressistes comme combattre l'influence des promoteurs immobiliers, une plus juste redistribution des ressources aux services communautaires et non les services policiers, et des quartiers qui sont construits pour les résidents et résidentes et pas seulement pour les automobilistes. The point of our event this evening is to hear about and learn from progressive struggles happening outside of our own city in Ottawa, Ontario, and from across Ontario and the country. Because we have someone here from City Councilor here from Vancouver tonight as well, Jean Swanson. Too often, municipal political battles are fought in silos from city to city, but what we don't often realize is that cities are facing many of the same battles we are facing here in Ottawa, like a city council and mayor resistant to change, over-bloated police budgets, endless suburban sprawl, and a housing crisis exacerbated by powerful developer influence. We hope tonight to discuss, learn, but also to create allies and relationships with those from other municipalities, like the councillors here this evening, so we can create a municipal movement that goes beyond the borders of our own cities. So as I said, our moderator tonight, I'll introduce her, is Khulud Baig. Khulud is a volunteer with Horizon Ottawa and has significant experience in community-based research, with a focus on gender-based analysis of housing and homelessness policy. Khulud is a member of the Women's National Housing and Homelessness Network and is a co-author on the report on the state of women's homelessness and housing need in Canada. Previously, Khulud was leading the housing file at Native Women's Association of Canada and currently works as a housing researcher with Keepers of the Circle, situated in Timiskaming District, Northern Ontario. And I also want to note, she didn't note this, but Khulud is also a big contributor to the Ottawa's most recent alternative municipal budget. So I will now give the floor to Khulud Baig, who is the moderator for the evening.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Sam. And thank you so much to everyone for joining in today. I know we're tight on time and we have a lot of things to talk about, so I'm just going to jump straight in. I want to introduce all of our panelists that we have on board today. Our first panelist is Ottawa and Somerset Wards' very own Catherine McKenney, the first openly LGBTQ councillor. They have been an Ottawa City Councillor since 2014 and the City Liaison for Housing and Homelessness since their re-election in 2018. They have been on the forefront of progressive fights at Ottawa City Hall, particularly the fight to get more significant funding for affordable housing in the city. Other issues that Catherine fights for while at City Hall has been more funding towards community and social services, better transit, childcare, more trees, streets that are built for people, better public spaces, protecting our heritage, and supporting local businesses. Thank you so much, Catherine, for being with us this evening. Our second councillor is Leigh, and I'm not sure if Leigh is on board yet or not, but I'll definitely introduce him. Leigh is a 33-year-old, three-term city councillor in Brockville. He is a director of Brockville Pride and a member of Canadian National Alliance to End Rural and Remote Homelessness Lived Experience Working Group. He's also the executive director of Tiny Home Alliance Canada. Leigh is an author, musician with his group Project Mantra, talk show host, activist, and a pro wrestler. Leigh is a former homeless youth, a punk rocker, and a public speaker. He's also a #1 international best-selling author, a frontline shelter worker in both Brockville and Ottawa, and the founder of Brockville Street Friends Homelessness Outreach Team. So hopefully we have him here soon. If we don't have him yet, I can't see him. So, sorry, is he here yet, Sam?
Yes, I am.
Oh, hi, Leigh. I'm so sorry. My screen is super crowded, so I wasn't sure if you had joined in. Welcome. Thank you so much for being here. Next up, we have Nrinder Nann. Nann was elected in October 2018. She is a community builder at heart who believes cities can be powerful places for people-driven change for issues such as climate, equity, and housing justice. Nrinder spearheaded the declaration of a climate emergency, a strategy to eliminate single-use plastics, the exploration of a vacant homes tax, the end of incentive grants to property owners practicing renovictions, and the integration of an equity framework in all city systems, investments, and services. Nrinder serves on Hamilton's COVID-19 Economic Recovery Task Force. Thank you so much, Nrinder, for joining us. And then next up, we have Kristyn Wong-Tam from Toronto. As a tireless community advocate, Councillor Wong-Tam has championed the expansion of green public spaces, farmers markets, community gardens, including improvements to parks and grapevines. Am I pronouncing that right? She has led efforts to defend the rights of tenants to obtain affordable and decent standards of rental housing and help create a neighborhood association to preserve and protect heritage buildings and historical landscapes in her ward. Thank you so much, Kristyn, for joining us today. And last but not least, all the way from Vancouver, Jean Swanson, elected in 2018 as a part of COPE, Coalition of Progressive Electors. Her priorities have been affordable housing for all, focusing on harm reduction, not criminalization, and poverty reduction. Harm reduction, not criminalization, and poverty reduction. Swanson is the city liaison for the Renters Key Advisory Committee, Joint Council on Childcare and Senior Advisory Committee. She has been an anti-poverty activist for over 40 years and is the author for the book, Poor Bashing, The Politics of Exclusion. In August 2018, Councillor Swanson spent 4 days in jail for blocking the access to Kinder Morgan pipeline. Thank you so much for joining us, Jean, and it's awesome to have everybody on board. I want to get straight into it and without any further delay, just ask our first question for today to all of our panelists. And it's a preliminary question to set all of us up for the conversation we're going to have for the next hour and a half. As we speak about working towards a people city, which is the topic of our panel today, let's start off with talking about the role of municipalities. What do you see as being the role of municipalities when it comes to pushing the dial on critical issues such as housing, transit, social services, but also decolonization and racial justice? And I'm gonna ask one person to start and then they can pass off to the next person on the panel and we'll go around like that. So Catherine, I'll ask you to start for this one.
Thanks, Khulud. It's great to see everyone here. So many amazing people. I'm a little intimidated actually, but let me get into this. The role of municipalities, well, if not us, then who? Certainly the federal government has not stepped into that space in any meaningful way. Here in Ontario, certainly our provincial government has not stepped into that space in any meaningful way. Also, I mean, we say it often, you know, we are the closest to the people. And what does that even really mean? I don't think we ever have really been close to people, but I do believe that that's changing. I do believe that groups like Horizon Ottawa, Cowie, the Alliance on Homelessness, like Acorn are actually bringing us close to people. And so, you know, when we're confronted with challenges like housing, transit, social services, racial justice, we have an opportunity at the city to actually make those differences. And they can be done in very specific ways. Housing, you know, we continue to segregate through our zoning policies and housing. You know, we zone out rooming houses, we zone out types of housing that will house people coming out of criminal justice system or coming out of homelessness. So, you know, our zoning policies are very important, and they're often kind of lost in that space where people aren't paying attention. Definitely, you know, how we build and plan our cities so that we have transit, affordable, efficient transit that's close to people who need it, not close to these big, tall condos that, you know, if you go and watch, everybody's pulling out in their cars. So it's, you know, we have an opportunity at the city to ensure that all of these issues are integrated. We're thinking about them. But I'm going to leave it there because we have a lot of questions. But I think that most important is that we are close to you, because you know what? You've come to us and you've made it a place where we are forced to start to listen to the people that matter.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Catherine. Maybe Leigh, do you want to go next?
Sure. First things first, thank you so much for having me and being part of this event. I'm touched and flattered. A couple of my heroes are on this panel with me, people who I look up to and admire greatly. So it's always wonderful to share this space. I'm Leigh. My pronouns are he and him. I'm an ally and an activist councillor in Brockville, Ontario, which is actually just down the road. We're on the cusp of the capital region. Campville has become a bedroom community to Ottawa. We are part of Leeds Granville, which makes me actually a constituent of the Minister of Municipal Affairs and Housing, which is an interesting one when we consider how provincial governments play a role in municipal affairs. And I'll take this opportunity to answer your question by addressing a few misnomers, in my opinion. First things first, I think it's interesting when I hear people talking about staying in their own lane. Many times municipal councillors, specifically in smaller, more rural, small urban centers, hamlets, whether they be conjoined municipalities, whether they be joint districts, whether they be villages, et cetera, townships. They often talk about how everything becomes the responsibility of the province. Well, that's not really for me to say, that's the province. And I think that's an interesting piece, because when Mike Harris took government in the 1990s, a lot got downloaded onto municipalities. So I think it's interesting that one government that is the be-all, end-all, know-all seems to have passed the buck down to those beneath them. Meanwhile, those beneath them are still able to skirt and avoid tough questions by constantly saying, well, maybe you should call your provincial representative. The constituents of municipality don't give a damn if it's Justin Trudeau, if it's Doug Ford, or if it's my local mayor, Jason Baker, or myself as a councillor. What they care about is the fact that there's a pothole on their streets. What they care about is a crosswalk that isn't well lit or isn't safe or being used effectively. What they care about is stormwater drainage. Those are the basic issues. But let's talk about some of the ones that are a little harder to talk about. I think it does my municipality a significant disservice when I say, well, housing being an issue that I'm, categorically tied to in my public life is not in my periphery, in my decision-making, quarters. I am also a constituent and also a tax-paying member of this municipality. And when I see issues that I believe can be adjusted, changed, and direct action and focus can be put on them, I think it's incumbent upon me to do so. The challenge becomes being more than just a token focal point for discussion and actually being able to attach hard and fast, specific civic action to it, which of course requires the partnerships amongst your municipal partners and of course amongst your other counterparts at government. Here in Leeds Granville, we have a joint services division that oversees our social services. So while the province is of course in control, there's still a form of a county-wide government that somehow makes the decisions. Keeping that in play, Brockville spends 40 cents on every dollar for social service delivery. So I think I'd be lying through my teeth and blank face to my constituents if I said that that's not an issue that I'm familiar with, not an issue that is within my workload, within my shadow cabinet, within my area of understanding. If it isn't, then I'm doing my job very, very poorly, because these are the issues that affect people most I guess, aggressively in today's climate. You remove rent control and you have people who are in a circumstance where a shortage of private market affordable homes that, as Catherine alluded to, sometimes are difficult to zone, and a NIMBYism that comes into play. And knowing that, as we see, shelters are the most expensive way not to house anyone. And the challenges that are currently happening in Ottawa as a frontline shelter worker, seeing point blank that there are people we have to turn away due to health criterion, which could be circumvented or probably avoided outright if everyone had a safe, affordable home to live in. They would be able to probably cut down on significant levels of affection that we're seeing within Ottawa itself. The other piece that I think is a misnomer is the idea that bigger is better. And I think that that is where municipalities have historically done a significant injustice. And there's a place that I think we can adjust when it comes to our zone ordinances and bylaws, our setbacks, our various different pieces put in play that basically says that there has to be a maximum square footage for some of the homes that are being built. Totally disregarding what wartime housing used to look like post-World War II and how important that was for the population. Whereas today, now we want to maximize revenue, which I think is also a disservice to the populace. So to put a bow on this, so you can go on to someone else, because we can go from this to another issue, and I can talk all night about transit and talk all night about those issues. The key here is understanding that passing the buck is something that all tend to do, and sometimes we do so with the best of intentions. Sometimes we're connecting dots. A huge part of what we do, making sure that we're getting people in touch with the people who can better answer questions, because we're not always going to be expert. But simply ignoring an issue because we are unaware of it or we've chosen to be ignorant to it, I think is where municipalities can take a more proactive approach dealing with such things as understanding what co-investment funds and national housing dollars are available in a community like mine, which wouldn't be on my council agenda. Addressing some of those issues head on is going to require looking outside of our own backyard and recognizing that today's backyard might look different than what we've been taught a backyard should.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you so much, Leigh. That was a lot of information. I think we're going to probably come back to quite a bit of it as we move on to some of our next questions. I want to quickly move on to Kristyn. If you want to add something to that, Kristyn, or what you see the role of municipalities being.
Thank you, and thank you all of you for spending your evening with us. Thank you to the organizers and just the opportunity to participate. I would largely like to associate myself with the remarks that have already been made by both Catherine and Leigh, and perhaps just to add something that that is perhaps a new dimension to it. And maybe I'll contextualize it as a Toronto City Councillor. We're a big city, obviously the biggest in Canada. Our budget is also very large. It's a sizable document, and it's a living document. Our operating budget is about $14 billion, and we have a capital budget that's worth close to $45 billion. And we're no small city, because we're now in a bit of a weird basket case, if I can call it that, just like a weird amalgamation, I call it, of 6 lower tier municipalities that have been merged together into one. So we actually are one mega city of close to 2.9 million people. So when I think about municipal governments and how the city of Toronto sits in all of that, and our relationship with the province, with our relationship with the federal government, and our relationship with other municipalities in Ontario and beyond, we cannot ignore how just the size of the city. So I would like to at least say that yes, cities too matter, and of course they matter largely because we are the closest order of government to people, and cities are really just nothing more than a collection of extraordinary neighborhoods. Toronto is no different than any others. But sometimes the bigger we get, the more disconnected people are to their local order of government, and that's been the case, I would say, for the city of Toronto. Largely because of the forced marriage amalgamation back in 1998. So in many words, I could say that Torontonians sometimes feel more disconnected to their local government because of the fact that we've just become so big. And because we've become so big, we're kind of sitting in this weird land of big enough to govern, but not big enough like the province to quote unquote rule. So we end up getting downloaded a number of responsibilities, largely because other orders of government have been shrinking from those responsibilities. So when you have a national government that may not be fully living up to the needs of a national housing strategy, or a provincial government that's walked away from adequately funding health and education, mental health, addictions recovery, all of that ends up being downloaded onto cities. So we don't have the opportunity to shrink away from that responsibility, and I don't think we should. So speaking to Leigh's point about staying in your lane, you know, the lanes have moved around on us. So it's not the fact that we wanted to jump into the provision of mental health care. We're sort of being forced into it because no one else is doing it, despite the fact that Ontario's mental health hospital, the Centre for Addiction and Mental Health, happens to sit in Toronto, but I represent an area that's largely called the Downtown East, Toronto Centre, and I can't feel Ontario's mental health hospital and their services in the network of my communities. So our residents are falling far from behind, and yet we have all the problems and very little of the dollars. I'll just put out one other point that may be worth exploring, is that there's been talk now at the City of Toronto about the creation of a city charter. So therefore, what do cities should be responsible for, and how do we define that in a document that binds us to the province and federal government? So if we lean into reconciliation and talk about what is our municipal role, the Truth and Reconciliation document actually has very few sort of calls to action for municipalities. Most of it sits with the provincial and federal government. But if cities want to take on that role, to do more, to speak to the call to action, then we should not be limited just because we're not named in the document itself. So the same thing could be said about taxation powers. The same thing could be said about land use planning and development. And for our colleagues and friends who are outside of Ontario, we have a very strange relationship with our province and the quasi-judicial, politically appointed local planning appeal tribunal, formerly known as the OMB, Ontario Municipal Board. We are very much second guessed all the time. Local planning decisions are overturned, and there is big development dollars and lobbyist interests that oftentimes guide those policies that undo local planning efforts. So do we have a piece of the pie? Absolutely. Do we have a big enough fork to go eat that pie? I would say no, and I'll leave my remarks there. So thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Kristyn. I'm just being mindful of the time, and I really want to come to ask this question to Nrinder and Jean as well, but if it's okay with you, I'll move on to the next question. Come to Jean. You can, Jean and Nrinder, if you guys can roll your comments in with the next question, that would be amazing, and that just gives us more time to move on and ask more questions as well. So the next question I have, it is building on the last question, is we are almost now a year into the pandemic that has exposed deep inequities and disparities in our cities, and municipalities have been the sites where these disparities have actualized and where some of the most critical responses have been shaped. So can you speak to what you and others that you work with are doing, or what we need to do to make sure that the issues impacting residents and particularly residents who are experiencing multiple marginalizations stay at the top of the council agenda? And Jean, I'll start off with you, and then Nrinder, I'll pass it on to you after that. Oh, you're muted, Jean.
Can you hear me now? Yeah, I was going to say to the other question that I know in our city charter it says one of the roles of council is to advocate to other levels of government, and unfortunately we spend a heck of a lot of time doing that because so much has been downloaded. Like from 1996, the abolition of the Canada Assistance Plan, so welfare rates aren't high enough. From 1993, when the feds stopped basically contributing to social housing in any decent numbers, so we're not getting the housing. So COVID has really, I think it's basically shown us that we have about double the number of homeless people that we thought we had because of the physical distancing in the shelters and because people can't couch surf anymore. So yeah, it's been terrible. And we also have the poison drug crisis. So we actually have lost more people to poison drugs than we have to COVID. So we're trying to fight two pandemics, and we have a huge tent city with about 200 people in it. And just trying to get some action on those is unbelievable, unbelievably hard, because all the levels of government have to get their act together to do it. I would do it as a city, but I don't have the votes for it. I'd say, let's just sell a piece of land, get some hotel rooms and put homeless people in them. But other councillors wouldn't vote for that. So yeah, I have been pushing for, we just passed a motion for, we have been advocating for a safe supply of drugs. Our council is united on that, right, left, and green. And we also passed a motion calling on the feds to allow us to decriminalize possession of small amounts of drugs. So we're really hoping that that will help save some lives. And all the people in our downtown east side are getting vaccinated today and yesterday, so that's good. So I'm just pushing for more action on this stuff constantly, and trying to organize people in the community to push on it. For example, one thing, another councillor and I wrote an op-ed on why the province should make the $300 COVID supplement for people on welfare and disability permanent, because they've already cut it back. And we actually got all the other councillors to sign on to that. So now we're using it for as a supplement to this 300 to Live campaign to try and push the province to raise welfare and disability. We've also been pushing for free transit, and it was in the province mandate letter to make transit free for people under 12. So we're making a teensy bit of headway, I think. And also pushing for more equity in everything. We had a motion last July that I made calling for replacing police services with community-led services. And there were almost 400 speakers signed up to support it. Nothing has happened on that. So it's a matter of trying to organize the community to actually push the city to actually do the work that we said that the city said it would do. So yeah, I'll just stop there and give some time to others.
Awesome. Thank you, Jane. Nrinder, would you like to go next, and then maybe also speak to any points that you had to the first question?
Sure. Thank you, Khulud, and thank you to everyone who's here with us tonight and all those who organized, and absolutely a big hello to my municipal colleagues that I'm sharing the forum with. My name is Nrinder. I go by she and her, and as mentioned, I'm in Hamilton in Ward 3. Oh, goodness. So from the perspective of, what is the role of municipalities, and given what we've been facing in this pandemic, and, how do we keep making sure that we are raising to the top the needs of those who've been made most historically marginalized and whose marginalization has only further been entrenched in our city, really requires every single elected representative of every level of government to lead with purpose and to lead with listening to what the reality is. It's been really disheartening in phase 1 to see so many accolades and applause around every municipal table, around all of the essential workers and heroes who we all relied on in that first wave of the pandemic, and recognizing their role as workers. And you almost heard resonating in almost every council chamber this understanding of our reliance on other people's labor. And at the same time, flip side, here we are in phase 2 of the pandemic, and we're seeing how workers' lives are being underserved. And we're seeing the impact of the burnout of that front line in terms of who's showing up and asking questions about needing housing support who didn't need it before. Folks who are on that front line talking about their need for accessing emergency food networks for the first time in their lives. Hearing from folks who are on the front line about their total state of mental well-being being so impacted by the burden and magnitude of the labor that they've had to produce. And then municipalities needing to question, what are we doing to support those heroes that we were so ready to applaud in the first wave of the pandemic, by making strategic choices about what we're investing in terms of public services, to ensure that those workers are not just continuing to provide that front line of support, but they too deserve this city. They too deserve to be able to walk around our city and access the green spaces that would enable them to socially distance and physically distance. They too deserve to have access to childcare in a way that's not precarious. And even making decisions about, fare freezes for transit as a way to show and share our gesture to the frontline workers about the fact that they've had to labor all this time. And the last thing we as a municipality want to do is dig into their pockets governments in order to subsidize or in order to balance out the books, versus thinking compassionately right now about what we need to charge fees for, what we are responsible for delivering for the people in our city, and what we need to strongly advocate for from municipal and federal governments. I think my colleagues around the table spoke, like they nailed it in terms of what's been downloaded, what's been defunded, what's been deprioritized over the decades. And as a result of that, a direct result of that defunding is what we're experiencing now in terms of the disparities of impact as it relates to this pandemic. So, you know, Leigh's bang on. We can't make excuses around municipal tables that previously, historically, have gotten away with focusing on a public works sacred cow budget. And instead, we have to think strategically and think critically about the complexity of issues that are squarely on the table of municipal councils. We have an obligation for the people that we represent, but also towards the next generation for whom we ought to be leading for. We need to leave our municipalities in a state of growth and thriving, so that, you know, we're positioning our municipalities to be leading moving forward towards not only a people city, but a city that is in harmony with its nature as well. You know, here in Hamilton, we've experienced, which I'm sure many other of my colleagues around the table and you all who are joining us from across the country have probably experienced, where as an activist or an organizer, you raise the alarm bells on a particular issue. And if you keep coming to that municipal table, your voice gets less and less priority or less listened to. And my concern in this pandemic really has been about the ways in which democracy and resident input just is not being accessed in the ways that we have historically, because of the sense of urgency around responding to this pandemic that every level of government is facing. And so, you know, as much as I'm supposed to be saying, how do we make sure we don't lose the voices of those who are most marginalized? I'm actually quite concerned right now about the decay of democracy inside of such an urgent decision-making cycle under these emergency orders and responding to this pandemic. So what I would say is that there is no better time and there is no more important time than inside this crisis, that inside this pandemic, for residents to really re-engage at the municipal level so that we can work together and actually, through coalition, lead towards different priorities being addressed.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Nrinder. And I would like to open up the table to Catherine, Kristyn, and Leigh. If any of you have any points to contribute to the question of pandemic and what you've done or what you've seen, I'd like you to I'd welcome you to jump in. And if not, then I can move on to the next question. So just want to open the table up.
I'll make it very quick for this time and just say, you know, if you don't mind me jumping in for someone else, I apologize. I can't hear one either on my phone. But what I will say is that the issues of marginalized communities are more front and center now than before. In that they're harder to ignore. And when we think of precariously housed and homeless folks, we see them, it's much harder for them to curfew, for them to isolate in place. And I think it has not exacerbated the issue because the issue was there, but we had some incredible alignment on the issue, which I think actually is a really phenomenal opportunity. And I think something to be cognizant too. But those opportunities presented to make things better or mean anything if there was no intent to do so to begin with. I think that's what's fun about this discussion, because otherwise my colleagues are arguing on. There's no shortage of social policies and interesting areas that we can affect, but it's one thing to talk about, you know, naming Essential Workers Day in Ontario or some token principle without also recognizing that we still don't have sick leave, for this example. So the opportunities are here, and look at Ottawa shelters. I see that popping up in the conversation. Work at them. And I see that firsthand. So that's the only contribution to this piece. But means continue.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Leigh. Catherine and Kristyn, anything you guys would like to contribute before we move on?
Yeah, thank you so much. And thanks for those comments, all of you. You know, the pandemic we've all said it, and I think we all recognize that it has revealed the absolute gaps within the social safety net. The problem we have, I think, is largely that we haven't responded to it, and now in the second wave of the pandemic. It would be worth noting, I think, that if cities have not put together a health equity impact, if they're not looking at spending through the recovery with an equity lens, which is, trying to purpose funds and put it into the hands of the communities that have been most disproportionately hit, then we are not going to be building back better nothing. And so the crisis is big and it's urgent, and obviously people are dying from a whole host of challenges, but we are also killing them by way of not taking stronger action, whether it's the poison drug supply or the fact that people are living in encampments. We have over 100 encampments in the city of Toronto, probably anywhere from 1,500 to 3,000 people, like literally, camped outside and choosing to stay outside. We have 10,000 people who don't have a home, who are housed in some form of shelter or respite system, and there seems to be no necessary pipeline out. And the hard part, I think, and we don't want to demoralize folks because what's at stake, is that I'm fearing that, as we build back this economy, as we talk about, recreating jobs once again, those who have already been living on the margins will be entirely erased. And the fight is so real as we walk into our 2021 budget right now at the city. And we were facing a $1.5 billion budget gap. And I still have a mayor who is reluctant and refusing to think about raising the property taxes beyond 0.07%. And so, we can't even get to a place of having an intelligent and honest conversation at the City of Toronto about what we truly need. And I don't think I can, as one local councillor in Ontario, and I know there's many of them here, I cannot even begin to count on Doug Ford and this government. They're woefully missing. They're absent from every critical conversation. And I will just say, they're really, unfortunately, making a mess on the COVID response, that they're constantly in a crisis, and we're spinning around with them. So if cities at this point, and I will say this is why your panel is so critical, why did the Toronto councillor jump on, is that, for anybody who's listening, if cities don't take charge of the social justice issues that are plaguing cities and our citizens and residents in our neighborhoods, then I don't think anyone else is. And I will just qualify this and say, especially in Ontario, when we have a conservative government that is so ass backwards on trying to help those who are most in need. Sorry for my language, but this one really bothers me. And thank you for letting me just go on a little bit. I really appreciate it.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I think all of you have such valuable critical experiences you're bringing in from all of your backgrounds. And I don't know, Catherine, if you wanted to say anything, or I can jump into the next question and you can roll your thoughts in there.
I will. I just want to say one very quick thing. On top of everything that's been said up to now, is that I think that coming out of this, we have to be very careful about who is defining our economic opportunities coming out. We know that going into COVID, pre-COVID, going into COVID, and now in COVID, it has been our very marginalized communities that have been, disproportionately affected. The inequities are beyond what even, we also have a ridiculous cap on our tax increase. But we have to make sure coming out of this that you define what those economic opportunities are, that the people most affected define what they are, and not the powerful voices that we have heard around council tables. So I'll leave it at that. There's not much more to add to what was being said.
Perfect. Thank you so much. I'm going to move on to the next question. And this is kind of building on some of the stuff that Nrinder touched upon when she was talking about the state of our democracy and the presence of the voices that need to be around the table. So we have last year across Canada seen a significant push from social movements and community-based political organizing that has led to a reckoning with structural inequities embedded in our systems. And last Wednesday on CBC Current, the newly retired Senator Maurice Sinclair says that Canada still needs a reckoning with the systemic racism that has been bred into our very institutions. So I want to ask all of you, and this is a bit of a drawn out question, so answer whatever parts you may want to, is in your role as a councillor, how are you disrupting or changing the way that status quo is upheld or the way that things are done? We've spoken a little bit about this already. And how are you bridging the gap between electoral or institutional politics and movement-based political organizing and voices that you're hearing from the community, hearing from the activists? And as you speak to that, it would also be awesome to hear about some of the best practices and that you've come across, and how can we strengthen these kind of tables and this cross municipality information sharing. So a lot of questions in one question, so answer whatever part you want to, and maybe this time around, Jean, we can start with you, and we'll go around. So you're muted again, Jean.
I should say that I'm on the stolen territory of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh, and commit to trying to get some of that territory back or get them compensated for it. So we have an almost all white council, and about half of our city is racialized, so it's not good. And we have an at-large system. So we're all there were 71 people on the ballot in the last election for 10 spots. So it's really hard for racialized people to get elected. And so as a white councillor, I try to be useful to people who are pushing for and try to push for change with teeth, not just more words about how diversity and inclusion are great. We do have an equity officer in the city, a brand new one, and I did get the motion for the equity, the budget for the equity work put back into the budget. And the city is supposed to be applying an equity lens to virtually everything, like climate change actions, housing, et cetera, et cetera. But I'm trying to push for stuff with teeth, like stopping police street checks. We passed a motion to do that, trying to, as I said before, trying to replace police services with community-led services. We declared January 29th a day of remembrance for Islamophobia against Islamophobia. So that was I try to do stuff like that, but I'm really worried that so much of it is just words and not teeth. And that's why I'm really pushing for trying to organize a community to push for toothy stuff like getting community-led services instead of police services, trying to stop the Trans Mountain Pipeline, working with the Tsleil-Waututh people to do that. The city has been trying to do that. The feds aren't cooperating. Yeah, so that's basically where I'm at.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Jean. And whoever wants to go next, if anybody wants to jump in at this point.
Maybe I'll just go quickly. I think that key to bridging that gap is a change to our electoral system so that we do get decent, progressive politicians elected. It's almost impossible to break the barrier, as Jean said. We have a very small c conservative council in Ottawa, not much in terms of diversity. When I was elected 6 years ago, there were only 4 women on council out of 24. It's ridiculous. Well, 23 in the mayor. So definitely we need that change in how we elect people, and that's hard because people who are elected today benefit from an unfair electoral system. Certainly, working directly with grassroots organizations in the community to make change, to ensure that we have, socioeconomic, racial justice. Again, COVID, if you look at the numbers in Ottawa, I'm sure it's much the same in every city. The effect on our racialized community, low-income community is almost double. congregate settings, you know, whether it's our shelters or, you know, other congregate settings. You know, you know, COVID has taken hold, and it's taken hold because we've got people who live in shelter who actually go out to work. They go out to work as personal support workers. They go out to work in Amazon factories, you know, in our fulfillment centers, and then they come back and they, you know, they carry COVID back with them. You know, my colleague who I saw was on the call right now, Councillor Menard, tried to pass a motion just asking our council to ask the province to provide paid sick leave for our frontline workers that, yes, we all touted as being heroes a few months ago, and our council wouldn't even pass that motion. You know, so it's, we need much better councils. We need more progressive councils. This is where people live, and this is where change can happen if we have the right people elected. And I believe that electoral reform would get rid of, it would sift out and place better people around that table.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Catherine. Leigh, I see your hand, so for sure, go next.
Thank you so much. I just want to say that the second paid sick leaves come, I mentioned it earlier, as a frontline staff who works at a shelter that I very much in Ottawa. I can say that we're a skeleton crew with so few resources that I would wonder if the place would operate if any of us had to take a sick day. These are the realities we're facing. And I thought that that was a really key point. And I remember us passing a declaration at our council talking Essential Workers Day, which was actually a really positive concept forward by someone, a councillor there, who young and thoughtful. I remember thinking to myself, as lovely as this is, one-legged turkey in this conversation, because an awareness is useless with that. It's tokenism. And in terms of the actual piece that this conversation deemed, I could spout my minds all day as I have been asked to. I'm also someone who has benefited significantly from colonialism. I'm a privileged white male with a big mouth who was rewarded for my efforts. I sit on council where we have one woman, no color, no one of any gender or any level of gender identity side of heteronormativity. And we have one thing we've always done well is young people. Young people with ideas are not necessarily progressive workers that we would assume. We hear youth and we hear young ideas and we hear concepts. A lot of us, our council, are very well-meaning people, and I love the community and by no means intend to bash it, as much as I would say that it's very easy for us to be a part of a racial equity alliance, or to pass a declaration, or to moment to honor Martin Luther King Day or a Black History Month or something of that nature. But if I ask my councillors, many of them wouldn't know what nation's land we actually sit on. As an example, what unceded territory. And I think that there's so much more to do than just with buzz politics that we see on Oliver trying to get reelected. I think for some respects, what we need to do is also recognize that as much time as I'm taking up throughout this presentation, I'm probably the last person you should be hearing from. And I think that's what we need to start hammering home to our elected officials. The best way to do that, the proportional representation, or even valid. At least then you have to listen to your opponents' opinions and all of their friends and followers too. Those type of things I think would be great, because now a lot of what happens in small town and rural is don't rock the boat. Don't campaign against the establishment because you'll need them to get elected. I think that the moment I start looking at my job through that, this is the moment I should stop doing it.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Leigh. And Kristyn, if you want to add something, and then I'll go to Nrinder.
Yeah, no, thank you for that question. And I think it's actually a really important question. Probably the most important question tonight is, like, how do we affect this change? And there are days where it feels like perhaps, we cannot, largely because we're doing it by ourselves. And there's a handful of progressives, I think, maybe on every single city council across the country. But clearly that's not enough. One of the most inspiring moments that I felt in my 10 years as a city councillor was watching the streets light up with protests and with community uprising during the whole defund movement. I don't recall a time, and maybe I'm not old enough, but I don't recall a time where there was almost a spontaneous uprise around racial equality, anti-Black racism, and who was demanding justice was just as remarkable, because it wasn't just the usual suspects of activists, as well as those who are, you know, already in the know, already very committed. There was a whole bunch of other folks that all of a sudden realized that the police had gone too far and that their use of violence was criminal, murderous. And they too started to voice their concern. So I knew that when middle class, very well off, light-skinned white people start to demand that we take more action to retask the police, and to defund the overfunded, and to invest those extra dollars back into community services, there was a power of a moment that gelled together. What we need to do is to make sure that we don't lose that momentum. And I'm very fearful that that momentum that began in June has started to dissipate, because as some of my colleagues have said, the motions that they may have been pushing through city council somehow has sputtered. Maybe it didn't get as far as they would like, but there's no report back mechanism. There isn't something else galvanizing the civilian population forward. And that's kind of what we need. So even with a small number of progressive councillors, but when you have the majority of the citizenship behind you in your city, well, let me tell you, the mayor felt pressure. Our mayor felt pressure. I'm sure mayors across the city, across the country felt some pressure to do something, say something. You cannot sit by in this historic moment and recognize that you're going to, sit this one out. Sitting it out was not an option. So I want to find a way, and I think we all need to figure this out. How do we capture that energy that was so raw and dynamic in June and catapult that forward on all the other critical issues that we're asked to debate and vote on? So therefore, it's not, Kristyn, the person of color, the non-binary, the queer person, the one person on city council representing the progressive. Like, I just can't do it. It's mathematically, it is impossible for me to win a council vote on my own or with the 7 other progressives on council when we have, we're not even close to a majority. To win a vote, you need 13. I got 7. So how do I get anything done? And how do any of my progressive councillor colleagues get anything done when mathematically at council we can't win? But on the streets, in the community, on the civic squares, we can win. And that's where we need to go. We need to bring the doors. We need to open the doors of local government, front doors, back doors, windows, side windows, blow everything open so people can come in. And that's where we're going to see that real political change happen. Even if we're using the master's tools to dismantle the master's house. When the people are in, it will be done.
Thank you so much, Kristyn. And to Nrinder, and I think Nrinder, you already spoke to this in your last question as well, so please take it away.
Thank you. I think the only thing that I can add really right now is the fact that, the system change aspects of electoral reform, although those movements need to continue wholeheartedly, the system needs to be transformed. The fundamental reality right now is that those of us who are in positional power need to use our positional power to elevate the voices of those who've been left absent from the decision-making table. I'm the first racialized woman to be serving as a councillor in Hamilton. Before me, there was the first Black man in 2014. Before that, the history of the City of Hamilton Council has always been white. And so that table, up until 4 years ago, started having to contend with racial justice issues, not because, residents weren't already raising these issues consistently every year, but because there was a progressive racialized man and a Black man at that table, bringing those issues to the forefront and bringing validity to the experiences by sharing his own lived experiences as an elected representative. And then me coming in as the first racialized woman around that table has been really about being able to put squarely back onto the city council table the reality that that table has consistently ignored. So even if it's simply leveraging my voice at that table in order to validate the experiences and validate the voices of those who are protesting outside or demonstrating outside, or those who have put together incredible research paper after research paper, analyzing all the lived experiences and all the ways in which racialized residents have been experiencing public service disproportionately. It's my job to bring accountability to that public service in Hamilton. And it, you know, as much as it's easy to get pigeonholed as the racial justice candidate or the climate justice representative around council table, or be one of 3 progressives, consistent progressives around a table of 16, it means that I have to dig deep and keep bringing it every single time. And that kind of consistency inspires that community that has been already mobilizing to not give up. And it inspires other younger racialized folks to consider putting their hat in the ring, because they can see you modeling, right, the kind of leadership that's possible when we have more progressives around the table. And so as much as sometimes it's frustrating to see a loss when you put forward very practical solutions because they're viewed as too political or too racialized in their focus, i.e. the whole defunding of the police movement, the very sound best practices of community-led services, upstream solutions and prevention and intervention, all the stuff that we know from a public policy and service perspective, getting belittled. Even in the face of that, stepping into the ethos of the movement that we believe that we shall win from the Black Lives Matter movement here in Hamilton is also an indicator to those of us who sit around council that we have an obligation to keep putting it on the table and keep trying to push incremental change where it's possible and move the system towards the transformational change that our communities and next generations deserve. You know, there's 7 women on the Hamilton City Council, and when other women in the city approach me and say, I'm thinking about running, what can you share with me? I have to say, fundamentally, at the end of the day, when it comes to municipal government, electoral reform will only happen when we out-organize. And there is every single opportunity to out-organize. And every single year that you're pushing your municipal council to deliver is actually an opportunity for you to get the next candidate lined up and ready to roll. So, you know, I have to use every forum to turn the conversation from policy back into what are you doing in your communities to elevate the next potential candidate, and making sure that they're well-resourced, making sure that they're well-supported, and making sure that they're getting every opportunity possible to lead in their neighborhoods and are being lifted up by those of us who have been elected in, so that we're making room for others at the table as well. So validating what we know our communities have been leading for a long time, sharing the lived experiences for those of the few of us who share racialization. And then I think the other piece is to hold accountability. And for Hamilton, what that's meant lately, aside from bringing a whole equity framework into the municipality, so much of that gets kind of watered down in the diversity dialogue versus the justice dialogue of equity. It's really important that for us, it's been about moving data and making sure that we are getting data and using data to deliver on the conversation about what we need to be strategically investing in order to show the population, show Hamiltonians what the return on investment has been, but more importantly, what the population outcome has been. So if we're not seeing the needle move, then that accountability for every city council has to be, you know, who's making the decisions around the table, and how do we circulate those individuals out that are preventing change and getting those who have the solutions to the table.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Nrinder. And I have 2 more critical questions, and I want to go and open the floor for some audience questions at 7:50. I know two of our panelists have a hard stop at 8, so I'm trying to make it all happen. But the next question I want to focus on is to talk about, we've talked a bit about this already, is racial justice in our cities. And we can't speak about racial justice unless we talk about unless we talk about policing. And a critical component of ensuring racial justice in our cities has been, and it has been evident from all the organizing that we've seen over the summer, is going to come from rethinking the role of policing in our society. So I want to ask all of you, what role can city councils play at this critical moment? What is some of the work that you've done in calling for action on defunding the police and investing in communities?
I'll jump in. Say right away that based on this discussion, now opportunity to pass the book, I guess. A lot of the police problems that I feel that we have actually do come from the Police Services Act, which is a piece of provincial legislation. And the fact is that I'm a proponent of organized labor, big a believer in a living wage, and big believer in workers' rights. Not every police union has proven itself to be entirely progressive. I have seen this definitely in large urban centers where they campaigned and rallied against municipal councillors as though they are against public safety. Fundamentally accurate. One of my closest colleagues is a investigator for police services who understands the defund movement, understands harm reduction, understands the entire concept that is necessary and important when it comes to working hand in hand with municipal council to address social ills. The challenge is those can be far between, and even there are lots of great ones, I'm sure there are, most times they're not the ones who you're hearing. You're hearing from municipal councillors, you would from municipal police officers, who many times criminalize those who are struggling and criminalize those who are coming from marginalized communities. That makes their role more difficult. I'm sorry, I'm just cutting out. I see that too. I'm not quite sure what to do about that. I will say that in this particular case, I think it's incumbent upon us to sort of not cower away from our local social service and police, understanding police emergency service. I can turn off my, I like that. Don't need you looking at me. You're all more lovely looking than I am here today. I will say that I lost my train of thought, but I was going with this was that the police services, they're going to often rally against councillors who are progressives because they as though it's challenging status quo. I don't think that necessarily a blanche response. It's there are definitely related circumstances where that's not the case. I do think that in this particular regard, more community policing is going to be a positive thing, but it's also a positive thing on the taxpayer. And I think here's where you start to pigeonhole an argument from just being about socially conscious and progressive. But if you're trying to appeal to a tax base that is concerned with community safety and appeal to a tax base who's frustrated with, a rising cost of living, I think you can probably make a significant argument when you talk about how many police officers are on desk duty because of suspension, how many times overtime hours, part of the discussion because of shortage of staff because frontline is on leave, sometimes due to some very challenging reasons. And I think that a more meaningful control of the Police Services Board is going to be fundamental to making sure that we're able to address community issues, but also recognize that community policing and terminology was we heard most famous during the broken windows of the 90s train of thought. More community policing and more boots on the ground, more the militarization of police force has so many people from marginalized communities end up behind bars for non-violent offenses. I think that the mental component is actually the fundamental driver of most calls, specifically small towns and significantly in urban centers too. The key is going to be working against your organized labor movement, which so many of us work with or champion in almost every other facet of essential service. And that's going to be challenged without looking like against public safety. We have to be strong.
Awesome.
I could jump in.
Go ahead, Jean.
So after all the defund stuff was happening, we had two motions at our council, both of which passed. One was to stop police checks and the other was to fund community, to have the staff come back with a report, a budget and a timeline after consulting with Black Lives Matter and a whole bunch of other named groups that are policed, and to come back with the budget timeline for actually defunding and putting the money into community services. None of that was done. We had to fight again in December to get the money to do that work put in the budget. But the motion passed in July, and I didn't think it would pass, but it passed unanimously. And the reason it passed is because we had almost 400 speakers signed up to speak, and they were very eloquent, and they actually changed people's minds when they talked about their experiences with the police. And they were powerful enough that they could overcome the propaganda from the police, who were actually fighting back and trying to maintain their budget. So what happened in December when we actually came to our budget vote was the police wanted an increase of 6 million. The staff actually put forward a consideration that would have been a almost negligible increase, but we got it through with no increase, which was, I tried to make a decrease, but that didn't pass. But we did get it through without the increase that they wanted. And the reason that happened, in spite of the police organizing to fight back, was because so many people in the community had pushed for it. So I just want to me, that is a really good example of how work in the community, like Kristyn was talking about, you need a movement to push the councillor to get what they want. We have to do more of that now to make sure that the work that's ongoing by staff actually comes up with something and is actually funded into the next budget. And that's going to be a lot of work with the community that we're trying to do. I just wanted to tell you about what a person that I know, one of the questions was, how are you disrupting or changing the way business is done at City Hall? And one of my mentors, although she's a lot younger than me, is Shama Sawant, who's a city councillor in Seattle, the one that got the Amazon tax. And she came up and supported my campaign when I was running for office. And she gave a speech, and I wrote down some of her rules for being a city councillor, which I thought I could read out. It's not too long. Don't negotiate backroom deals. Open up your office at City Hall to working class people. Use your position as a political insider to build up the number and power of progressive activists on the outside. Understand that we're in a class war initiated by the ultra-rich. View your battles through an international lens. Fight the logic of the capitalist system. Remember that even small victories are contagious. Don't follow the polite rules of traditional civic politics. Identify who is with your cause and who is opposed to it. You need to have the political courage to make enemies in high places. If you lose, go down fighting. I just wanted to give you one more example of we wanted vacancy control in our single room occupancy hotels because they're being gentrified so fast and pushing people into homelessness. Vacancy control meaning no rent increases are based on the unit, not the tenant. And everybody was basically against it. So we got 75 speakers signed up, and it was a late night, and the other councillors really did not want to hear 75 speakers. And they actually agreed to vote for the motion if we would agree not to hear the speakers. So it passed unanimously, and now we've got the city working on how to bring in municipal vacancy control because it looks like the province may not do it. So anyway, it was just a little example.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Jean. Anybody else wants to jump in on this question, particularly around policing and rethinking the role of the police?
I'll take a little stab at it. And this was a very difficult debate for me personally. It was very emotional. And I will own up to the fact that, we didn't prevail. So I was one of the two councillors that actually advanced the motion to defund the police by a minimum of 10%. And just so everyone is aware, the police budget in the City of Toronto is $1.2 billion. So Councillor Matlow and I were looking to reallocate $120 million to alternatives to policing. So whether it's community-based supports or community responses, you know, we would figure that out. But I do think that it's important for us to make sure that the money and the services are combined and follow together. So we were not successful, despite the fact that we had probably received thousands, like literally thousands and thousands and thousands of emails and correspondence. And it came with a political price. And I think it's important for us to recognize when progressives do this work, you know, if it's not perfect, I would say it's not going to be to everyone's necessary liking. And we had people telling us that we didn't go far enough, and they'll probably continue to say that we haven't done enough. And I take those words to heart, that we need to double our efforts and triple our efforts to do more. But we got the ball rolling. So that motion was not successful. The other motion that I moved was to actually basically reduce the police budget when it comes to arms. So I wanted to take away the military apparatus that they have in terms of weaponry, and that they had to eliminate the use of force. No more tear gas, no more tasers, no more other type of military hardware in their possession, because I don't believe we need that with a civilian force. And so, you know, there are a number of things that transpired, but, you know, one thing that's important for all of us to recognize is that sometimes things don't happen on the first shot. And interestingly enough, the City of Toronto adopted a report from the Toronto Police Service Board. It's the report is called the modernization around the Toronto Police Service. So it's called the way forward. And in their own report, they cited that they could find $100 million worth of savings if they made some amalgamation of divisions, if they relocated some police headquarters, if they you know, realign their schedules, like the way the police scheduling happened. They said that they can find $100 million of savings to be given back to the city council, so therefore we can use it for other things. They adopted that report at the Toronto Police Service Board. We adopted that report at city council. They have never given us $100 million. And yet when I moved that motion with Councillor Matlow to take away $120 million from the Toronto Police, they fought us tooth and nail, to the point that, you know, if we were going to take away even $1, you know, we were going to see crime spread and mayhem would break out, and we'd be living in a place without law and order. The scare tactics were so real. And I actually had a candidate who was running for the Toronto Police Association run on a platform that he would deal with me politically, personally name myself and another councillor, and that was his platform. I will deal with, you know, Councillor Wong-Tam and Councillor Leigh, who is another progressive. If you elect me as your president of the association, the union, this is what I will do for you on your behalf. So the price to be paid as a political progressive in neoliberal dominated governments is high. And I don't think anyone fully appreciates, to be quite honest, how difficult sometimes that job is when you are of the minority voice. Doesn't mean I'm going to, of course, go away quietly. I'm no wilted flower, but it does mean that we need to be able to take care of those who do get elected. I'm not advocating for myself. I'm advocating for other councillors, younger people that we want to welcome into government one day. If we don't take care of them and we don't cherish them and honor them and still hold their feet to the fire, how are they ever going to want to run for office? Because if people watch what happened to me politically as I ran through this debate, why would they ever want to do it? And I tell you that it was a conversation that my wife and I had. We have a 20-month-old toddler, and, you know, walking the streets, who am I supposed to be scared of? Who is protecting myself and my family? And there's a big question mark that doesn't always get answered in the most conventional way. So thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Kristyn. Catherine and Nrinder, like if you want to jump in on this question.
Cool, thank you. So, you know, one thing that I can share, I think it's always good to hear about the tangible experiences. A few years ago and I guess it was 2 years ago and 3 years ago, our Hamilton Pride events were attacked by hate-based organizations and groups and individuals. And the first year it went down, and there was a lot of community uproar about that not needing to take place or should not take place in Hamilton again. The second year it happened, there was a lot of calls for accountability because there was a response rate from our Hamilton Police Services that was brought into question, and the fact that the hate-based attack turned violent, and many folks in the Pride community and allies who were trying to create a buffer zone around it were subject to violence. And so my role as a councillor on that day, aside from Pride happening in Ward 3 in our most cherished public park in the ward, was to lift the voice of those who are concerned and asking for accountability. I don't serve on the Police Services Board. But what I do at the council was to be able to use the forum of council to call for an independent inquiry into the way the police handled the incident, to look at an operational review, but also to bring the Police Services Board into check and say, this went down and it requires a response. And using my political power and position as a councillor with another colleague and submitting what we believed being a course of action with the community's input. And the reason I bring this up in a framework of a question that speaks to racial justice is I think it's really important to look at those small wins, as Kristyn mentioned, and talk about how we might be continuing to evolve and transform the way policing occurs in our municipalities and who ends up getting harmed as a result of it. And so what ended up happening is the Police Services Board couldn't ignore it. The people were calling for accountability, and then you've got two, Hamilton councillors calling for accountability around the operational practices of the service. And the independent review resulted in a very thorough investigation of the operations and ended up with a list of recommendations that the Police Services Board needs to choose to act on in order to not only mend the relationship between the Two-Spirit LGBTQ+ community in Hamilton and the police services, but also spoke to the rest of the equity pieces there too. They acknowledged and named hate-based activity and who is most harmed and the way in which the service is not protecting those of us who experience hate. And so, on one level as a councillor, if I don't get to choose fundamentally at the end of the day how much police services ought to get of our tax-paying dollars, I can use my position to call for accountability in the way that the service is operating. The other thing I can do is bring my analysis from a financial perspective, and the fact that in our city, there's been annual surpluses in the service. So year after year, our service has generated surpluses, and it has just automatically gone back into the service without any scrutiny or checks. And when you look into that and you ask the right questions, you realize there's no policy governing surpluses around policing, because the practice is you don't question it. The practice is you just let it go, right? That policing is somehow a sacred cow that councils shouldn't be examining to, one, call for accountability, and two, look at whether or not it's a right-sized budget. And so to Kristyn's point about the fear mongering and the kind of political tactics that unfold when you start asking the same questions that you would ask of public works, the same questions you might ask of a different service of the city, the fact that for some reason, because we're asking it of policing, we are now entering a realm that councillors aren't supposed to. And I'm sorry, that time is done, right? Like that era of politics is over. We have to acknowledge the generational change that we are a part of and acknowledge the way in which our systems are being called into reckoning to stop the status quo and right-size our processes and our governance process to move forward towards the world that we want to leave for future generations. So from that perspective, the incremental change that we're able to make because it's a front burner issue in 2020 to 2021 around policing versus the ongoing approach that we need to take to make sure that those systems are changing, and policing fundamentally is dealing with its systemic anti-Black racism and systemic racism as a public service.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Catherine, I want to give you an opportunity to jump in on this question if you have things to add. I know you have a hard stop at 8. I want to let people stick around for councilors who can stick around a little after 8 to talk to people's questions. That would be awesome. But I just wanted to make sure we get everybody in on this one.
I'll be very brief. I think that I get to be brief because I go after everyone and they've all said everything that needs to be said. Our outcome was, I wouldn't say similar to yours. Kristyn in Toronto actually did much better than we did. And we actually watered down and tried to do less than what you were, and it was not successful. And that was, that was after hundreds of people also came out to our police services board meeting and demanded something different. But I think that is really important, and Nrinder really touched on this, and I think it's just something that we have to keep in mind. Policing has always been held in this realm over here, and cities and the policies that we are responsible for as city councilors over here. And our communities are healthy when people can move about. When shared space, public space is accessible, it's open, it's safe, people can be creative and productive. And that cannot happen when we have systemic racism and in our police force. It cannot happen when police, over-police our low-income communities, our racialized communities, and that happens all the time. So what is happening with police is actually making our community so much less healthy. So it's actually a public health issue that has to be addressed when we're addressing policing. Moving that money over into mental health, social services is critical. I mean, we can have the discussion whether we think we're doing the police a favor or not. Doesn't matter. It needs to happen. We need that funding in our public health system, our mental health system, so that we can respond to the issues, homelessness, opioid addictions, our overdose crisis in our communities that are not being addressed by police. It's actually getting compounded and worsened by police. I'll leave it at that.
So thank you so much, Catherine. We're at 7:55. We had a lot more questions to get through, but I want to take some time and open the floor up to audience questions. And I know people have a lot of questions to ask. We've been getting them. So I'm just gonna go up my chat and then, or unless Sam, if you have something already picked out that you just kind of want to go ahead and ask, because I haven't had the chance to look at the chat. Let's see. Okay, how about this one? Municipalities clearly don't have resources and are constrained by regressive tax systems. So does that mean that provincial level action has to be the top priority moving forward? That's a good one. Anybody who'd like to take this on?
Well, I think for that last question specifically, it's got to be provincial action, because we are so often a slave to a police services board budget and that type of fear-mongering campaign. And the municipality has very little ability to affect the budget, especially in smaller and more rural settings or small urban settings that aren't quite standalone, like maybe Toronto might be. So I think this is an opportunity where you could say that that type of activism and that type of lobbying would be more effective.
I was just going to say, it's Jean here. I think one of the things progressive councillors across the country have to do is get together and fight for a municipal source of revenue that's progressive, that isn't a regressive property tax where you have to pay the same rate on a $400,000 condo as you do for a $75 million mansion. I'm seeing that so much here that if the federal and the provincial government are going to download everything onto municipalities and then say, you have to pay for it with a regressive tax, that's not right. And I think most municipal politicians are clued into this. And I think it would be a really great fight that we should unite in. I know I campaigned on the idea of a mansion tax, that we could have one rate of a property tax for properties that weren't worth very much, and another rate for mansions worth over $10 million. And we could use that to fund housing for people who are homeless. But unfortunately, we can't do that unless the province gives us permission. So I think we need a giant campaign that, unless the senior governments are going to do what they need to do in terms of homelessness and things that they're downloading on us, they need to give us a progressive source of revenue. Anyway, that's my pitch.
Thank you, Jean.
If I can lean into what Jean just said, and Jean, you had me at $75 million mansion. I can't even imagine what that looks like. I thought the Toronto real estate market was heated, but wow.
Yeah, Chip Wilson, Lululemon.
I guess so. It's not to distract myself from that quantum, but I think, Jean, you actually raised an excellent point. And if I can just put this into a different sort of context, we have a feminist prime minister, and he's talked about, how gender equality is of great importance to him, and it should be to all his cabinet ministers. He's got mandate letters that have gone out and specifically talked about intersectionality and around gender equality. So all their funding, all the funding that comes from the federal government should be tied to legal agreements through territories and provinces, as well as cities, by way of the way the flow of dollars is. They should bind us to that same objective that they are trying to pursue federally. So therefore, there shouldn't be a single federal dollar that comes out of Ottawa that is received by provinces and territories without a commitment to intersectional gender equality, which then gets to everything, right? So we know that it gets to people of color, it gets to Indigenous and Black individuals, it gets to people living with disabilities, because we've got that very holistic intersectional lens. That is not a difficult thing for them to do, but they just haven't done it. So what's the point of having a feminist prime minister that talks about equality and equity if you have the power, the biggest power in this nation, and that's the control of the federal bank, and you are creating all sorts of bonds to try to buy yourself out of the recession of the lockdown? Why on earth are you not building back better and insisting that the rest of us, the subnational governments below, not do the same thing? So it's not exactly about asking for more powers per se. I think we can all use a bit more powers, especially for small cities. But it's about making sure that the governments that are in place, who tell us that they are our allies, to take advantage of that political opportunity, because there is a power of a moment. And if Trudeau falls and we have somebody else that doesn't talk in the same way, that doesn't follow up with action, then we're going to be in worse shape than we were when Harper was in power. And I would just say that, because the social fabric and the safety net has now become even more fractured. It's more broken than ever before. And those rips are not going to be mended together by using the same conventional tools.
Thank you, Kristyn. All right, so we're at 8. I don't know if Catherine and Nrinder, if you want to, are you gonna head out? Okay, awesome. Thank you so much, Catherine, for joining.
Thank you, everyone. So sorry, I do have a really hard stop, but this was great. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you
I'm
so
in the
much.
same boat, and I just want to say thank you so much for including me. Catherine, nice to see you.
Yeah, you too.
everyone's involvement.
Everybody.
I look forward to future events like this too. All the best, folks.
Thank you. Thank you. So
I have to head too, sorry. Thanks so much for organizing, you guys. Really nice to meet everybody over the screen here.
awesome. Thank you so much. Thank you, Jean, for joining in all the way from Vancouver. I know we have a lot of questions, and I've put in a suggestion to Sam that maybe we need to have more issue-focused conversations that are kind of narrowing in, and our deeper conversations are on things like taxation, things like policing, things like climate crisis, and housing and Indigenous leadership. I think, given all the questions that we have, I don't think we'll have an opportunity to get to all of them. I'm probably sure Nrinder and Kristyn, you have to leave as well. So I think I'll just hand it over back to Sam. And Sam, do you want to speak a little bit about Horizon Ottawa, and if people would like to donate? So a call for donations for all the amazing work that Sam's doing, and leaving a link.
Not just me. But yeah, well, first, for those who are panelists who are still here, I think Nrinder and Kristyn, thanks so much for joining us this evening. I think it's really important to have it's conversations with councillors from all across the country and all across Ontario, and to knowledge share and to create those alliances and not to organize in silos, and for cities to work together. But I did want to make a small pitch here tonight with while people are still here. All this work that's being done by folks at Horizon Ottawa, it's all work that's being done by volunteers tonight and throughout these past couple of months. So if you're able to give whatever you can, a small amount, between $20, $200, whatever you can give, go onto our website right now on horizonottawa.ca. One of our members, Danica Brisson, just posted in the chat the donate link. So horizonottawa.ca/donate, and just give whatever you can give so that we can keep doing the great work that we're doing. We would really appreciate. And if you want to go the extra mile as well, and become a member of Horizon Ottawa, again, same there. It's a small amount. It's whatever you can give to become a member, a yearly fee of, and a sliding scale of anywhere between 0 to whatever you can give. So we would really appreciate that. So with that, I'd like to thank all of you for joining our panel here tonight. And thank you again to Kristyn and Nrinder, who are our panelists who are still here, for joining us. We really appreciate it. And thank you so much also to Khulud Baig for moderating this panel tonight.
Thank you. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining in. And I hope to see all of you and cross paths with all of you in some other events and some other such conversations and dialogue. I hope you guys have a lovely rest of the evening, and hopefully more work like this coming your way.
Thank you so much.
Have a good night.
Bye, folks.